All right, Brent, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks
Today
for
we've
having me.
we've just got a few questions. I know we've met a lot and talked a lot, so we'll probably be restating some of our stuff, but we've got a new scenario today. So today we're kind of talking about travel, specifically like international travel. When someone's going on a bigger trip, a longer trip, um, things can happen. Heaven forbid, but
Yeah.
things can happen. So why is it important to kind of get estate planning done before a trip? And we'll kind of start there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And maybe I'll challenge the premise of it.
Yeah.
Right. Is it really that much more important to do it before a trip? What is it about travel that creates the sense of urgency that we
Yeah.
should do our estate planning? I mean, honestly, you're a lot more likely to get into problems for the 50 weeks that you're at home commuting on I-15, two
Yeah.
times a day than you are on a 1 or 2 week vacation. So that's kind of an interesting thought. And I think that travel doesn't necessarily create
More risk
more risk, but it helps us recognize what risk is
is
out there.
already there. Yeah.
And it gives us a deadline, right?
Yeah.
I know that if I'm leaving on May 1st and I have this heightened awareness of, oh, what happens if things go sideways,
Yeah.
that deadline might spur me to act, even though the risk isn't really that much more elevated.
That makes sense. So, in your opinion, if I'm feeling that, right? Like
Yeah.
say we're in the moment and I'm we're going to Europe, we're going to be gone for a month. I'm leaving my kids at home. I'm worried something might happen with me and my wife. Is it worth the risk? Like is it worth all of that trouble, all of that effort to get everything going? Should I just wait till we get back? I've got the time. What's kind of your take as an expert that deals with this often? Is it worth all of that hassle?
Yeah. And so that's a really good question, too, because I think it helps to really stop and try to understand what it is that we're trying to guard against.
Yeah.
And so Um, obviously, the risk of death is not really that much more heightened when we're abroad than it is if we're at home. In fact, it might even be less because often when we travel, it's in a really controlled environment.
Yeah.
I've dealt with people who have gone decades without doing any estate planning, and all of a sudden they're traveling to Mexico and they think, "Oh my gosh, I'd better get this done." Find out they've spent all week at an all-inclusive resort, and they are so much safer at that resort than they ever would be
At
here
home.
at home.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you're right. That creates a deadline, and it's worth thinking about what is it that we're trying to guard against.
Yeah.
And so, when things happen abroad, it does become more complicated. And so, if we're not necessarily guarding against dying, I mean, we are, but other things that we're guarding against, I mean, we become stranded.
Mhm.
Like, say you were in Puerto Vallarta 10 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago when the cartels kind of took over for a little while,
Yeah.
and you got stranded there for an extra week and you had bills to pay at home and you had maybe a real estate closing or you had
Yeah.
some business work that had to be done. How do you get that done if you don't have anything in place that authorizes somebody to act for you? A simple power of attorney,
Mhm.
would solve all those problems. And so, we might think to ourselves, well, yeah, I can always get online and transfer money and this, that, and the other. But the truth is, often things can't get done without somebody actually
Physically
doing a
there,
signature.
signing. Yeah.
And so having a power of attorney in place can do that. Same thing if you're hospitalized. We do get ill when we
Yeah.
travel, and sometimes we have to go to a hospital, and those simple problems can become more complicated. And so having a medical directive in place, giving somebody the written authority to make decisions for you can literally save a life.
Yeah.
So when we expand it beyond like, okay, I'm afraid that I'm going to die and I might, I hurry, I need to really get this done just in case things go catastrophically wrong. I don't know if you're asking me, is it worth rushing to get that done when I've got all the other stuff in
Yeah.
traveling to get done? On the one hand, well, no, because your risk is less probably than it
Yeah.
was before you left. On the other hand, we can take advantage of this deadline
Yeah.
and we can get at least some basic things in place that you can finish up later, but you can put a power of attorney in place. You can put a medical directive in place. You can put a guardianship document for your minor children
Yeah.
in place, and then you can finish it when you get home. You can do the trust or the will or some other things when you get home later on. Honestly, it doesn't take that much longer to do the whole thing than it does to do those documents, but it's a real mental challenge sometimes to make that emotional leap. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to plan for my death.
Yeah.
Really, that's what we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with this natural procrastination that we have because we're in our routine. And I drove to work yesterday, nothing happened. I'm going to drive to work tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. But I've never been to Dubai, right? And
Yep.
so if I'm going to Dubai, something might happen because it's out of our control and it's out of our comfort zone. And so, yeah, maybe we can take advantage of that and use it to spur us to action.
Yeah, I love the procrastination that you brought up because I feel like what human doesn't deal with that on anything that we're not excited about, right?
Yeah,
And who's excited about planning for their death? No one, right? Like
nobody.
it's
Yeah.
it's not something anyone gets excited about, but you can use that motivation and that deadline to kind of overcome some of that procrastination.
And
Not that we have to, right? Like
yeah, and also just in general, fear is not really necessarily a productive motivator.
no.
So we can shift the conversation away from being afraid of what will happen towards wanting just simply to serve those who come after us
Take
and
care.
create a framework that's not going to tie a bunch of legal knots that are so hard to untie.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if we look at it as, okay, well, I want to be proactive and I don't want my children to struggle with a guardian who won't be permanent, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't want a guardian to have unauthorized access to
Mm-hmm.
finances, or I want to make sure, you know, that whoever's making medical decisions for me has the power to do it and knows what I would want.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of shift that away from the fear mindset more towards a kindness preparatory
Yeah,
mindset.
taking care of your kids even if something happens.
Yeah,
And I've got kind of a follow up to that. Like I'm young and healthy. Um, I still feel like maybe that is something I should think about. But like, how do I go about evaluating who to put in charge of, legal guardianship of my children, or
yeah,
maybe even an authorized signer? And what do you kind of recommend that you look for? Obviously, there's a good way to make that decision and some bad ways to make that decision.
yeah,
It's hard to know if you're making the good or a bad one right away, and probably why you want to review it regularly, depending on relationships and how
yeah.
things go. But what's kind of the process of getting that done, and how do you recommend somebody evaluate who they put in charge?
Very good. And there's really two different decisions that need to be made. One is who is going to raise the children,
Yeah.
particularly who would raise them with your set of values and with
Hmm.
respect and kindness and discipline. You know, make sure that they're raised right.
Yeah.
And then who's going to take care of the money?
Yeah.
Because those aren't always the same people.
Not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, they're often different people because somebody who's maybe really good with your children, and this is my personal feeling, I don't think that somebody who's raising your children should also have the purse strings.
Yeah.
It's just too easy to
Manipulate and
well, to conflate the larger family's needs with your children's needs. And it's really easy to say, well, let's just take everybody to vacation in Paris at Disneyland on the trust's dime, right? We
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to do that.
Yeah.
So somebody, you know, I think parents are imbued with a broad understanding of what their children need. And when they're in the middle of making that decision, um, and that's probably the first thing, is to confirm that you're making the decision
Yeah.
and to really make the decision and stop thinking about it hypothetically all the time. But okay, I'm going to make this decision. I'm going to put pen to paper. Who is it?
Yeah.
And evaluate from there who shares my values, who loves my children. You know, are they also raising children that are my children's age? And that's another
Competing.
question. Maybe they're competing, but maybe it would form a nice dynamic, but maybe it would be too much to handle.
Yeah.
I don't know. All those things to evaluate. The most important consideration, of course, is, are these people, are they kind? Do they love my children? Will they treat my children the way they would want to be treated? Not like, you know, Harry Potter versus his cousin Dudley, you know,
Yeah.
right? But somebody that would truly love and care for my kids.
Yeah.
And then the money side, you know, who's good with money? Who
Yeah.
could I trust to find the right investments over the next 15 or 20 years before my children get their money?
Yeah.
And then the guardian would approach that person and propose a budget for raising them and things that they would need, and those two would work together to make sure your children have the money that they need.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And then as far as the process goes, is that pretty fast? Is it just filling out some paperwork, having a conversation with that individual that you're making, maybe setting some guidelines? Obviously, I know we've talked a lot, like there's a lot that you can do to make sure they can't abuse the money and to put in some checks and balances. But as far as just delegating that to an individual, is that process pretty straightforward?
It is. In the event of a death, the guardianship is put in place one of two ways, either by a judge,
Yeah.
and confirming it with the state
Yeah.
and the state agencies who make sure people are in the right place. Um, you can go a long way to offset that by using a will.
Okay.
We name guardians in a will.
Okay.
So if you pass away, you would name your guardian in the will. Of course, that's one area where you would have to probate the will in order to have
Hmm.
the guardianship made legal, even if you have a trust,
Yeah.
because the judge will have to confirm the guardianship choice. Somebody will do a well check,
Yep.
make sure the house is an appropriate place. So an agency will still all be involved in getting that formalized, but at least you
It's
can,
streamlined.
yeah, you can put that in place, and the judge doesn't have to like set this thing in motion where they're going to search for the right people or hear the petition from a bunch of people. We can do an exclusion instrument of guardianship
Hmm.
where can be a private document. No, doesn't see the light of day, but it says, "Hey, I really love these people, but under no circumstances should they raise my children."
Yeah.
And you put that down, and nobody sees that except the lawyer,
Yeah.
unless one of those people
Comes forward.
challenges your decision in the will
Yeah.
and says, "No, I should be the guardian." And in that case, you can pull that out and say, "Your Honor, the client's thought of this and they've specifically excluded this person. We do not want them to be the
Yeah.
guardian." Your crazy sister-in-law, somebody, who just wants the children's
It's
money.
funny. For me, my wife and I have talked about it. It's grandparents, and
Yeah.
not because we don't want them to be involved in the children's life, but I want my kids to have a grandparent that's not a parent,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's important too. So I could see them challenging that and wanting to help. You know what I mean? And because they love them, but that's something I'd never thought about of making sure that they don't, because
Yeah,
I want them to have a separate grandparent from a parent, right? Like,
absolutely.
so yeah, no, like that connects with me very well on that side of things. So
Yeah,
I
I
understand
think
that.
that's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Perfectly reasonable. And then, if you're going to leave money for your children to be used conditionally or throughout their life, it has to be done in a trust kind of framework.
Yeah.
So even if you die with a will or without a will, if there's money left behind for the children, the judge, the probate courts will create a trust and
Mm.
place somebody over that money as trustee until your children become of age or
Okay.
come of age. So you can put those conditions in yourself by using a trust,
Okay.
saying, "Okay, well, if I pass away on this trip, I'm going to leave my life insurance policies to my three children, $1 million, $330,000 each.
Yeah.
I don't want them to get it when they're 18. I'll give it to them a little bit now, a little bit when they're 20, and a little bit when they're 25, whatever it might be,
Hmm.
with use before those ages for certain reasons." And that happens within a trust, and you can control that a lot better.
I like that.
Yeah. So,
And then that kind of brings me to my next question, which you kind of answered, but like, what's the importance of making sure an attorney does this versus me just kind of doing some document I find on the internet, trying my best to fill it out, just getting something in place versus nothing. But it sounds like there's a bit of legal and we want to make sure it's done right so that what we want actually happens. Can you speak to that a little bit?
you bet. And I would just say that I'm not a baker. And the first time I tried to bake a cake, it didn't really turn out very well.
Yep.
I've tried multiple times to bake bread. It never turns out exactly well. And I recognize that. And the first time I do anything is not
Perfect.
great. And
Yeah.
it's not going to be as good as it should be. And so I would just say that the same thing happens. Look, you're not a lawyer. You shouldn't be expected
Yeah.
to think of everything and to do it right the first time.
Yeah.
I mean, when was the last time you did anything for the first time and you did it right? So I wouldn't make my children the guinea pigs of my first time effort,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so an attorney that's experienced in this has seen hundreds of situations,
Yeah.
literally hundreds of situations, and has thought about these questions and been educated on these questions and gone to continuing education on these questions, and can help you clarify some things that maybe you hadn't thought of. For example, that example of well, maybe your guardian and your financial guardian shouldn't be the same
Yeah.
person, right? That comes from experience.
Yeah.
It's not just theoretical.
Yeah.
And how do we solve medical problems when you're alive, but you can't make decisions for
Hmm.
yourself? I mean, what happens if you don't have a document or an enforceable document
Yeah.
in place? Well, I've seen that.
Yeah.
I know. So I can talk to you about what that's like. So I think that's really it. There's a lot of great tools out there that can help you get started. And if you really want to, that's great. I wouldn't expect an attorney. It's hard. It's going to be hard for you to find an attorney who'd be willing to review it.
Mm.
I get those calls sometimes like, hey, I did this online. I just need an attorney to sign off on it. I'm like, heavens no.
Yeah.
It would take me a lot longer
Than just to draft
to
it up.
read through it and make sure all of the paragraphs are aligned and that the internal references are clean and to think through everything. It'd take me longer to do that than it would for me to do it in a way that I'm used to.
Hmm.
And so I wouldn't sign off on anything like that. I think most lawyers wouldn't sign off on that.
Yeah.
So,
And that makes sense, right? Like
yeah,
you're putting your name behind something that you
that I
don't
didn't do.
understand
Yeah,
and you're trying to find a loophole. And yeah.
that's right.
And that brings me to my next question. Say I, got with an attorney 10 years ago. I don't want to use that attorney again. Do I really need to review that will again? What's kind of the best practice if it's been a long time, things are set in place, maybe my finances have changed,
Yeah.
but what do you recommend in that situation?
It's always good to have a review if it's been that long.
Yeah.
If it's been 10 years. And you can go to an experienced estate planning attorney. They won't just tell you you need something if you don't,
Yeah.
right? If you go and you have a review, most of the time that's done in a free consultation environment. And the questions are, what's changed in your life? And well, I have more money, and my children are older.
Hmm.
And I named my sister, and I don't know if I want my sister to be in that place. Well, then, yeah, we can discuss what those actually say and what
Yeah.
they do, and maybe make a recommendation of how to
Adjust.
or fix it. Um, I would say it's fairly important to do a reasonable review every 5-ish years
Okay.
or so. Um, uh, if you've moved out of state is another good reason to do
Okay.
that. And yeah, there really is no substitute for having a comprehensive look.
Yeah.
For example, just this year, the medical directives law in Utah changed.
Mm.
2018, the laws regarding the inheritance of IRAs
Mm.
changed dramatically and how trusts deal with those. And so I know a lot of people, maybe did an estate plan in the mid 2015-ish, 2010s, and named their trust or their trust as the beneficiary of their IRA account and haven't looked at it since. And I'm telling you that there's things that need to be looked at,
Yeah.
and so laws change, families change, circumstances change. It's a good time to take a
Yeah.
look.
And especially if we've got a trip coming up, you're kind of saying 5 years. If I'm worried, I'm going on a trip, say I know it's in like 4 months. It's only been 3, 4 years, probably a good chance to get a review if I'm worried about it or if I feel like things have changed substantially, in your opinion.
Yeah, and a good that and again, that vacation is a good
Motivator.
deadline,
Yeah.
good motivator.
Yeah.
And yeah, use that motivation to your advantage to say, okay, here's it done. And if that motivation or if that deadline is coming up too quickly,
Yeah.
then you can, kind of use another deadline to do it. Like, oh, well, my birthday is in July, right?
Yeah.
And by the time I've had my next birthday, I'm gonna.
How'd you know my birthday's in July, Brent?
I
That's
didn't.
insane. Yeah.
But I'm going to use that deadline to make sure that we get things done. Or, January 1st,
Yeah.
New
Yeah.
Year's resolutions.
New
That's a
year, new will, right?
good
Yeah.
time.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So,
And then we kind of talked about this earlier, say like an emergency or we get stranded, and how do I make sure someone's in control of my money in the right way? So, for example, like, um, what happens if my kids are still young, something happens, and I need to make sure money gets over to them? Either I'm out of country or something happens to me out of the country. Setting up, what would the right document be? Is that one that's in the will, or is that one that should be outside of the will?
yeah, if you're still alive, those are things that should be outside of the will.
Okay.
And this is a kind of a common thing. We put together a pre-vacation package,
Okay.
and it just has a simple guardianship will, a temporary guardianship authorization,
Yeah.
a power of attorney, and a medical directive.
Okay.
And that's really all that you need.
Okay.
And then, like I said, you get that done before you travel. It's not too much time or effort. And then when you get home, you kind of finish up the package.
Love that.
So,
Yeah. So you make it quick so that we can get
mhm,
things done and make it a little bit painless before a trip and get the ball rolling so we know our bases are
yeah.
covered and then we can iron it out later.
Yeah, I think most people would need at least, 5 to 6 days to
Okay.
get the paperwork processed. I
Okay.
mean, there are rush options available for people, but anyway, the more you think ahead, the better,
Yeah.
right?
And then as far as guardian goes, is that just somebody who's there in the trust to watch after my kids, or is there a legal process that I need to make sure is done? We talked about the exclusion. Um, outside of a will, you kind of mentioned
So
that
for
other option.
for a permanent guardian, for a permanent guardian, that's always a legal process that's going to involve a court.
Okay.
A court has to issue an order that names the guardian.
Yeah.
So you would name that person in your will,
Okay.
and then when you pass away, the court would confirm that decision. DCFS would go through, do a Welch, do a home check, everything, and then they would sign off on it. Everything, you'd have those guardianship things done.
Set in place.
Um, for like if you're stranded for, let's say, you go somewhere and you can't get home for a couple of months and your kids need to enroll in school,
Yeah.
power of attorney and guardianship, temporary guardianship documents could make that work.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
so
And then if I am going on a trip and leaving my kids, is it intelligent to kind of disclose kind of plans for, hey, there's money set aside for you to your kids, or this is the process? And we're getting too into the weeds, or obviously it's going to depend on age, but what's kind of your recommendation on that? What you've
yeah,
seen work well in the past?
to disclose to the guardians maybe that
Guardians and the children.
and the children.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, if you're concerned about, I would certainly disclose to guardians like, hey, if something happens, we've got this trust and
Yeah.
will, and we've got this life insurance policy,
Yeah.
and I've named my successor trustee who kind of understands what's happening. And so, yeah, that's a good thing to talk about. And certainly with medical directives and with powers of attorney, the person who you've named should know that they're in that role
Yeah.
and say, so if I can't come back for a while, and I don't have access to a phone, please take care of things. And the power of attorney is required to act on your benefit or act on your
Yeah.
behalf for your benefit. They can't self deal without consequences.
Yeah.
So, um, so yeah, they should know what role they're in, and then the guardian should be aware of what resources are available. But that would be the job of the successor trustee or the executor also,
Got it.
to make sure that the guardian had the resources and knew what was there after the unthinkable happened.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And then you kind of touched on this, but how much time, say I'm worried about all of this and I want to get everything done. How much time should I give myself? I know I've got a trip coming up in 6 months. You said minimum it's like 5 to 6 days to get just the
yeah,
preliminaries done. How much time should I give myself if I want to get all of that done and done right? Right? Like not rushing it. And,
yeah.
yeah.
Ideally, you'd begin talking to your lawyer a month or two before you left.
Okay.
And if you needed more time to um, find the right lawyer, you probably explore that a little
Yeah.
bit earlier. But you'd probably want to engage that attorney and begin the process no longer than a month before you leave,
Yeah.
or no sooner than a month before you leave. Just because you don't want to rush that person, and things happen to your schedule too. And
Yeah.
it's happened where um, documents were finished, but schedules couldn't align, and the person left on their vacation.
Couldn't sign.
And they came back and signed it then.
Yeah.
And that's a case where, okay, well, the deadline was really effective
Yeah.
to help them get things done.
But not signed.
It didn't really solve any problems, but it could have.
It could in the future. Yeah. Yeah.
So it will certainly in the future. It could have, but yeah, you want to give it enough time.
And it's, oh, go ahead.
So yeah, that's at least a month before.
Okay. And same thing with the review. How much time should I give if I've got things in place? A few things have changed, but I'm not all that worried about, major changes. Maybe just a few updates here or there, and then I'm concerned about laws that I might have missed and I don't know about.
Yeah.
How much time should I give for that review? Say like it was done 10 years ago. I know I need the review. I'm worried about that. What's the timeline I should give myself on that?
I would do the same thing.
About a month.
About a month to 6 weeks.
Okay.
If the attorney recommends changes, you want to make sure there's enough time to get those changes done so that you're
Yeah.
not going in the day before to sign stuff.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
excellent. I think that's everything we have for today. So
Great.
thank you so much, Brent. I'm sure we'll be back again soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks.